Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name's Sara Wills, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this forum in my capacity as the Director of the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative. I want first to acknowledge that the University and the Faculty of Arts, of which the initiative is a part, is located here in Parkville on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung peoples. As an initiative of the faculty and the university, we are grateful to the traditional owners, elders and knowledge holders of all Indigenous nations and clans who have been instrumental in providing the grounds for the very important conversation we need to have about recognition of the unique place held by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the original owners and custodians of the lands and waterways across Australia, dating back more than 60,000 years. We acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy and our responsibility to commit to respectful and responsible conduct towards all others as we open a space for conversation and dialogue on this land. And it's on this basis today that we launch a series of forums that consider civic stories in an age of polarisation. The activities that people undertake in relation to the place in which they live, out of a sense of shared responsibility to raise humanity together. It's a series that has been put together by the Melbourne Public Humanities Initiative that emerges from work in the Faculty of Arts and very broadly is committed to what we like to think of as the new humanity makers. Those speakers, audiences and organisers interested in being a part of a dialogue about how, simply put, we raise humanity together. Over the next 3 months, we'll be presenting 3 awesome speakers who, to our mind, fit this description as new humanity makers. They also happen to be 3 awesome women. A champion of the right to read freely, who has blazed a trail through the US library system and beyond. An extraordinary law professor who is also a novelist and champion of Indigenous social justice here in Australia, and a UK-based but US-born chair for the public understanding of humanities who is a keen observer of US politics through the prism of literature. Please be sure to check on these upcoming events online. But let's get to tonight's guest and our host and our keynote speaker. In a moment, I'll welcome to the stage Professor Tony Birch, who is the Bois Bouvier Chair in Australian Literature here at the University of Melbourne. Tony will be familiar to many of you as the award-winning author of novels such as Blood, Ghost River, and Women and Children, fiction that takes seriously a commitment to understanding people and place and giving dignity to the way in which marginalised and misrepresented people might choose to create their own journeys of redemption and hope. Tony's short stories, poetry, essays and academic writing are also award-winning. Shadowboxing, Common People, Darkest Last Night have received national and international praise. Some of you may also know Tony as a teacher. He taught Aboriginal history here for many years, urban studies and creative writing. Or you may be familiar with his voice as an activist on the street or in the media. He's a mad Carlton supporter, a dedicated father and grandfather to a considerable tribe, and describes himself as a proud Fitzroy Black. Tony will introduce our keynote speaker and be available to be part of the Q&A. At the end, please join me in welcoming Tony Birch to the stage.
Thank you, Professor Sara Wills. I have 2 major tasks tonight. The first one that Ali just reminded me is that I have to tell people to make sure your mobile phones are off. So can you please do that first? That's a very important task. The second one is to introduce our guest speaker, the first speaker in this series. I'm going to do so by reading Tracie D Hall's formal bio, which is will take quite a while. It's very substantial and just epitomises the qualities of this wonderful scholar and thinker. But I want to just briefly follow that up with my engagement with Tracie 2 days ago with a wonderful group of students here at the university. But to start, public scholar, strategist and librarian Tracie D Hall is a distinguished practitioner in residence at the University of Washington Information School. She is the immediate past executive director of the American Library Association, the oldest and largest library association in the world, serving library and educational institutions throughout and beyond the US. The first black woman to helm the ALA in its near 150-year history, Tracie is currently at work on a comprehensive study of the history of book censorship in the United States as she continues her activism in defence of intellectual freedom. She has been the recipient of numerous awards for her professional and civic contributions and became only the second librarian to be honoured with a National Book Foundation Lifetime Achievement Award in 2022. Last year, she received the Literacy Leader Award by ScaleIt and was named on Time Magazine's inaugural 100 list of the most influential people of 2023. So that's the formal bit. I just want to add to that, on Tuesday, Tracie was very generous in having a forum discussion with art students here at the university on the issue of banning books. And meeting Tracie for the first time, hosting her at that session and having a long lunch, an alcohol-free lunch, I believe. After the session, one, I found her to be remarkably generous. She was wonderful with the students and you could sense the energy that Tracie gave out and was reciprocated through those students. They asked wonderful questions and Tracie was very impressed, I think, with the student discussion. What I would conclude when I was walking home, and we've discussed this earlier, is that she has an incredible intellect. She is a very generous and open person, but also she's a very powerful black woman. And if she was my sister, I would not dare cross her. I can tell you now. I'd be in big trouble because what Tracie reminds me of is so many powerful Aboriginal women in my life, and you always want them on your side and you don't want to be a bad boy on the wrong side of the fence. So please give a generous welcome to Tracie, who's now going to present to us on the topic at hand. Thank you.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Okay. Maybe the left turn mic. Okay, thank you. All right, this is it here? Okay, so you can hear me. Okay, that's no problem. Put this back. Hello. I am excited to be here, and I have a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to do a lot of prefacing, but I definitely want to thank everyone who has had anything to do with just the deep organization and care that has been sort of surrounding my visit here today. I want to thank Sara, I want to thank Jemiah and Ellie and Thompson. And I want to thank all of you for being here because I know that it's been quite rainy and it's been a lot of different types of weather today, and you braved it. But I hope that something that is said here will cause you to think and will connect with what you might be working on or thinking about or how you might be moving in the world. And so I want to get started. I want you to say something for me, though. I want you to say, information wants to be free. Information wants to be free. You can say it louder. Information wants to be free. Information wants to be free. We can say it a third time for posterity. Information wants to be free. Information wants to be free. That's really apropos of nothing, but that is but that is one of my deep convictions. And you know, when you sit down in information school, like day one, second one, you are reminded of that. And so I sort of operate, you know, within that ethos, the understanding that information wants to be free, that there's something that I might say or something that you might say back in the Q&A that really needs to be said so that it can make this kind of conversion that I'll talk about. So let's see. I'm clicking and thank you. So you want me to do it like that?
No, you can try.
Okay, all right. So that's what I'm talking about here today. So let's get into it. So I have a goal. And the goal that I have is to examine the impact of artificial intelligence, or AI, specifically machine learning, on human literacy and ultimately on civic fluency. And I have a promise. It's not going to be boring. So for those of you who might be like, oh, what did I sign up for? I think that we will unpack these terms. Some of you are experts, some of you are already writing and leading the research in this area, but I do want to make the connection to human literacy and more specifically to civic fluency. And so I want to unpack these terms. Now, one thing is that if I weren't a librarian and if I weren't interested, you know, a lot of my research is on a history of reading, I would listen to what people say when they talk about PowerPoints and they say, don't make them text heavy. I do the opposite. I want you to read as much as possible and you will understand why. But there are some terms that I'm going to be using that I don't want to use loosely, and I want to make sure that you are understanding sort of the context or the flow with which I'm using them. So I'm not going to read them to you, but I'm giving you time as I talk to read them. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, you know exactly sort of the angle, specifically machine learning. I'm really focused a lot on machine learning, and I'm going to show you rather than tell you. Then I want to talk specifically about this notion of not just literacy, like reading literacy or print literacy, but specifically human literacy. And human literacy I will unpack here for a moment. Human literacy is that sort of knowing, that knowledge that allows us to not only be human and experience ourselves as human in the world, but also connect to the humanity in others. And then lastly, this notion of civic fluency is what we do with that information that allows us to not just have economic and social mobility, but to have a kind of political buoyancy, or to behave as advocates, or to stand up for ourselves and for others, for our communities, etc. So why am I interested in this? Right? So a lot of my research comes from like real life situations and real life problems I'm trying to solve. So the reason why I was really digging in human literacy at various points of my career is, one, when my aunt was alive. My aunt passed away just before I accepted the position at the American Library Association. And my aunt was one of the first, she was a part of the first cohort in the United States to get a master's in public health. So she received her master's in public health in about 1969-70. So she was like right there at the sort of precipice when you know, we were beginning to think a lot about public health and beginning to codify public health practices. And when she retired as the administrative nurse of General Hospital, which is one of the biggest hospitals in Los Angeles, where I was born and raised. But one of the things that happened when my aunt, she died when she was almost 80, but in her late 60s, early 70s, she went back and she became a mentor in sort of remedial school for nurses. And I said, Auntie, why, what usually are some of the issues with the nurses? Why are they sort of, this is like the step before they lose, their nursing license or certification. And she said to me that they're not reading. They're making mistakes with medication because they see something as an A and they give the medication and that's not the right medication. And so I began to think about that and to look that up. And of course, some of those of you who know and who look at this too, you will know that mismedication or mistakes in dispensation of medication is one of the huge reasons why there are issues and suits around malpractice in hospitals. And so the idea that nurses, and I'm not just saying just nurses, but my aunt was focused on nursing, that people are making those types of mistakes because they aren't reading. That stuck with me. The second, information more, information less. This idea that the more information that we have access to, the less information we are able to make sense of, right? And this happened because I was going to speak, this didn't happen here, but I was invited to speak on a campus. So I get there early and I'm, walking around and everywhere I look, there it is, I'm speaking. So they've given me where I'm supposed to go. So I walk into the building and there are staff everywhere. And there are all the posters, but it doesn't tell me exactly where I'm supposed to meet the people to get mic'd up and all of this. So I come up to the first person and I'm like, hi, I'm Tracie Hall and I'm here to speak. And they're like, well, I don't know what to tell you. You're speaking today? Who are you? And I go to the next person, and I said, but it's right there. It's right here, And a couple of people, different, said, oh, I don't read that. I didn't know that. You're speaking today? Oh, yeah, you are. Information more, information less. The next is something that maybe isn't so funny, it's not so light, but this is a map of Chicago. And that map was the map that was a heat map for COVID-19 contagion in 20. And I don't know if you were paying attention because every country had its own issues and every city had its own issues. But at one point in the US, Chicago was one of the epicenters of COVID-19 contagion. In fact, unfortunately, I lost some friends. This is before we were able to get vaccines and even before we were really able to talk about disease mitigation, and I'll talk about that later. But Chicago is one of the most racially and economically segregated cities in the United States. But it's also one of the areas where we experience digital redlining, where in the city, there are some areas in the city where, the internet is popping. And then there are places like on the south side where I live where it's buffering all the time. And I was looking like this as But what we see on this heat map is that we see the wealthier areas in Chicago tended to have the least disease, COVID-19 contagion. The dark burgundy ones, and this is where I live, were the same places where we had the least digital access and also the highest contagion. And our Governor Pritzker, who came up a lot this year because he was considered to be a viable possible vice president candidate for Kamala Harris, he said early in the pandemic that what was making COVID-19 really out of control in Chicago is the lack of digital access and low literacy. So, human literacy, the notion of being able to have the information to keep oneself safe and alive during a crisis. And then lastly, the unabated rise in censorship. We are at a place now in the United States where 46 of 50 states have either passed or have pending legislation to ban books. We have several states that have banned whole words like gay or diversity or inclusion or social justice in the United States. So why is this happening? Shifts in human literacy. All right. So, although there is growing awareness of the kinds of changes that the ubiquity of technology is causing in human literacy, we seem resigned to just accept the effects. And I'm no Luddite. Obviously, I'm interested in information access and I'm also interested in accelerating information access. But I do think that we have to understand and also seize control of what's happening when it comes to information disparity or any type of information ill. So one that everybody is talking about is the end of reading. What we know is that with writing, this is not conjecture or surmising or an anecdote. We know that with the rise of digital technologies, with the rise of the internet, people are reading less, even though they're reading all day. And we're going to talk about that. Even though people are consuming information from the time they wake up until the time they go to sleep, we are still reading less. Why? Why? And yesterday, a brilliant student asked me this question, and I said it's really more complicated. Because I think one of the questions is what's going to happen to libraries and what's going to happen to books. And one of the things I said there is that we have to kind of think about, because we're beginning to read books, or at least to buy books. The book as object is really important to us, right? Textuality is really important to us. I think he's here. And he asked an amazing question. I'm not going to call you out, but I was like, you the bomb. I'm like, yes. My students at the University of Washington better come with it like y'all came with it the other day. But the thing that I do want to say is that what we know is that even though I don't know yet that this is actually challenging the book in terms of its primacy in our life, what we do know is everywhere, including Australia, we as a species are reading less. This thing won't keep up with me. I'm going to talk, so I'm going to make it like real quick, like a sword, All right. So over the course of a few, and this is where, this is why I want us to kind of I don't know how we can just combust, just get we have to understand what's happened. Over the course of 50 years, we have seen a complete change in human behavior because of a device. It's like the will or fire. I don't know if people are this excited. I mean, it's scary too. But the reality is that we've seen a complete change in human literacy because of the cell phone. And I just wanted to kind of give sort of like a timeline, because this is so recent. Who remembers having a phone that looked something like 1993? I did. I could say a lot more, but let me keep moving about that. How we thought we were so fly, You have it, it'd be so heavy. You put it down, clunk, But because of where we read, and let me get into this with you. I don't have really good eyesight, so I gotta get up on. Because of where we read, and I just wanted to kind of look at the internet, the mobile phone, and while we don't have conclusive data to show how many people across the world rely on the internet as their only access point to text-based information, we do know that internet users spend 6.5 hours online every day. And I was like, I don't know that that's true. And I was just, going around Melbourne and people out in the street, like the light, and they're like this. I'm like, these people are made of Teflon or something, because nobody's looking up. I'm like, they're just trusting, right? They're looking deep. I'm like, oh my goodness. But young people between the ages of 16 and 24 spend an additional 2.5 hours online compared to those 55 to 64. So what we know is that the use and the persistent use, the consistent use of the mobile phone or information access on some type of a device, mostly handheld, is increasing with younger people. Now, I want you to hold on to this factoid, and I want you to listen deep when I start to talk about changes in literacy rates for young people. I just want you to hold on so you can do some cross comparison. And then, of course, I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to compare devices in terms of the share of users. And what we see is that we see obviously the primacy of the mobile or smartphone. And we can just keep thinking about this. But I also want to make sure that people are looking at game consoles and smart home devices, because that number is going to rise. And I also, and if we were talking about immersion, I would, if I was giving another talk to talk about immersion, I would spend my time with the smart home device, the Alexas of the world, and also the game console. But that'll be another time. So because we've changed where we read, we have also changed how we read. So I want you to take a look at this here. So first of all, we read less. There's like data everywhere. We read less, y'all. We read a lot less. Reading has changed from long form to short form. Whereas reading used to be reading a magazine, reading an entire article in a newspaper, reading a novel, reading a complete manual, we are now reading for much shorter periods, and we tend to change the way we read in terms of direction. Whereas we used to read from right to left, or in other cultures from left to right, how do we read now? Don't cheat, don't cheat. Up and down, yes, up and down, right? We scroll. And we're reading up and down, but the reality is because of the way we're scrolling, I think there's going to be data in probably the next 5 years that'll say we were reading really, honestly, in terms of where we're comprehending, we're reading down up. And I could say a lot more about that. We are also what I call swallowing rather than chewing information. That's the best way I know how to say it. We swallow information, we don't chew it, right? We are not, when we're scrolling, we are basically putting the thing in our mouth, and we get the satisfaction when we click up. So there's some, and that whole middle piece, we are prone to read the introduction and the conclusion without necessarily understanding how one leads to the other, okay? And this is just data. I mean, there's so many books. There's books, and there's a lot of really good dissertations coming out now to talk about our changes in reading. There's a lot there. There's articles too that are speaking about this decline in a way that is really grave, and yeah. And I wanted to like focus on Australia because right now Australians tend to be reading more books than Americans on average. We also I see a real worrying trend when it comes to young people and their reading. And I wanted to bring this to you because the drop-off is so deep in terms of young people not reading that I thought to myself, I want you to be concerned, and I want you to investigate more deeply what this might mean. And I tried to look at it. I was trying to spend some time trying to say, okay, is it the early adoption, relatively early adoption of digital devices? Like, I tried to do the same timeline, that timeline that I showed you with the cell phone, from the cellular phone to the smartphone, is universal. But I was really trying to see what data I could parse and find that would tell me why there's this deep drop-off when it comes to literacy for young people in Australia, and I just haven't been able to find it. I would need to really, to be responsible, I would need to really spend some time digging and trying to look at education dissertations and other types of things. But I did want to bring it here because it is something to be concerned about. And it's not just me saying it's something that we should be concerned about or Australians should be concerned about. There's article after article, and I'm sure you've seen them, that says that this is something that is not a blip on the screen. This is something to be concerned about. And I also wanted to point out too, and we're going to get to another slide, that show that just like in the United States, we have a significant portion, in our case sometimes it's 34%, of people who haven't read a single book in a year. In any type of format, we have 25% here, or 1/4. So these are some things to think about. And then obviously, I have just outlined a couple of things that, maybe you might want to take a look at. But I also want to kind of get past and unpack something that, I asked you at the beginning to kind of say information wants to be free. And I really want to kind of, because I'm going to come back to this, I really want to unpack something like, which is, what is information? So when we talk about information that we're getting from reading, what is information? And here are some examples, but I kind of did in blue, highlighted in blue, 2 areas that I think are specifically important for today, and just in general in terms of my understanding of what the purpose of information is, which is to obviously lead to knowledge, either the communication or the reception of knowledge or intelligence. But it begins in this kind of cycle. And it's a wheel that sort of refreshes itself, in that it starts with just generic data that has to be converted into information. And then information is converted into knowledge. And then when we have knowledge, we create new data. That creates new information. That creates new knowledge. And the best way that I could sort of think about it in another way is that we are always in a process, or should be, of accessing information, interpreting information, and applying information. AIA. Accessing, interpreting, and applying. And when we apply that information, it becomes knowledge. Does that make sense? Okay, AIA. If you don't remember nothing else about that wheel, data, information, knowledge. I access data, I apply it, so I interpret it, so it becomes information, and I apply it, so it becomes knowledge. Researchers are also finding, and this is just something that I want you, when you get an opportunity to look up, which is why I really wanted to screenshot the entire article. But when we think about what's happening in terms of information, is that even when we do access text-based information, the quality and depth of our reading is changing, and it makes us much more prone to disinformation and to information apathy and antipathy, and even information aversion, right? So what we used to do with an article or a book is read it. And now we're doing something called skimming, where we're just taking the bits of information that resonate the quickest, And we call that reading because we just don't have the time. And even there's a lot of data that says we don't even have the attention span anymore to read deeply. So we're engaging in a lot of skimming. And I want to talk about that because as I'm talking about the way that we've changed our reading in terms of the direction that we're reading, and sort of the intensity with which we're reading, the amount of information we're consuming, I really wanted to talk about the fact that there are some real changes. Some would say neuronal changes in terms of our brain's ability to read deeply. So before I go on, I just want to stop. How's it so far? You all right? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Okay, all right. Don't embolden me now. All right, good. So I also want to talk about how we're misreading. All right? It's not enough for me to talk about how we're reading and how the reading has changed. I want to talk about how we are misreading. One is through misinformation, right? We're reading tons of misinformation. And misinformation, it doesn't have like a point to prove, it's just wrong. People didn't do the research. They got it from their buddy. They thought they heard that you could drink bleach and, cure yourself of COVID. Well, maybe that was disinformation. Disinformation is intentionally wrong information. And I always say, remember when misinformation was the good old days, because we are now deeply engaged in disinformation, and we know this. We know that we are swimming in a sea of disinformation. We also have information poverty. Information poverty is where we just exist and make decisions without good information at all. And I want to say too many organizations do this and normalize it, right? We're going to do this. Did we study? Did we ask? Did we survey? Do we have aspirational models? Have we visited others, talked with others who've done it? No. We just need to do something by Tuesday. Information poverty. We also have information poverty because a lot of the segregation that we experience is that people are not just poor, especially when it comes to economic segregation. People aren't just poor, they're information poor. Because if you have very little money, but you have an information-rich environment, then not having money is a blip. It's like something you can get over. What compounds poverty is being information poor. When you not only don't have a job, you don't know anyone else who has one. And they can't tell you how to get one. Where not only do you live in substandard housing, you don't know anyone who lives in sufficient housing. So you're stuck, information poverty. Information disparity is when all the people in the front near me, you get the best information. Okay? Information disparity, y'all in the back, did you hear me? Sorry. That's information disparity. Information disparity is where we allow there to be silos and bubbles and ripples of information that don't reach everyone. Information that can be life-changing, that can provide opportunities. Information disparity. And too often we participate in information disparity. Information redlining.
Have you got enough wine for me to tell everyone?
I was telling folks that if you meet me at a particular time, I'll buy you a glass of wine. Because usually information disparity comes with some type of perk for being in the network. Being outside of the network means that you are left out sometimes of lifetime opportunities. And that is, we could talk about networking, all of that. We're going to get into it, but hold on if some questions are bubbling up. The next one is information redlining, and this is something I spent a lot of time writing about because it still happens. Just like there are parts of the city that you are not able to live in, I'll say in a city like Chicago, unless you know someone who knows someone who's going to allow you there, especially if you're a person of color. certainly in Chicago, like how I maneuvered to get certain apartments that were cheaper, but in better neighborhoods, is because I knew people. Otherwise, I would have been redlined. And as soon as I got there, I put my friends on, right? But information redlining is an experience that we have when you live in an area of Melbourne or an area of Chicago or New York where there is no good fiber optic lines. They're not even investing in fiber. And so you get online and you just buffer in. And everybody else in the better parts of the city and experience deeper investment in even things like fiber that allows them to have like a fluid experience online. That's an example of redlining. And then lastly, these are some areas that I want us to kind of think about because they happen. Information exclusion. You're just left out of information. It's different than disparity because I'm giving people close to me the good information, we'll see, but just exclusion. Information is happening, you have no idea when it's happening, who's making it happen, you're just not involved in the information loop at all. A lot of times that happens in despotic situations where there's bad power, there's illegitimate power, or there's sort of like tyrannical power. Decisions are going to be made. We're going to take the whole internet down, and you're not going to know about it. And that's been happening more and more if you're watching. Like the internet is conveniently coming down when there's an election, or conveniently in an area if you watch it. Lastly is information withdrawal. Information withdrawal is a form of censorship where information that was in the public realm or information that was available is suddenly hidden, erased, restricted, challenged, banned, or removed altogether. So while we're talking about reading, we are also having like all of these examples in our lifetimes of misreading, of not being able to read, or of being misled. We also have less mental real estate. And it's sort of like a vicious cycle. Books are getting shorter. Publishers understand that we are not reading as long. And they are conforming. They are making books to make sure that books are marketable. A big book is a scary book. So we even see now real changes in the length of books. We also see, when you see why no one's reading most of your content, even online. And what is one of the things that you see? I circled it for you. It's a 10-minute read. And that's what you see. Now, nobody's going to read that because it's 10 minutes. Usually, it says it's a 1 to 3 minute read because the average time people are going to spend on an article, a long-form article is 3 minutes. A lot less time. So this is like, Trevin Shirley is just very optimistic. Ain't nobody gonna read that. And also, one thing that I wanted to make sure that you had these data points is that even though we're doing most of our reading online, the reality is it takes us longer. Reading online is not as immersive as a book is. And that is one of the reasons why when that question was asked, is the book going to be completely changed? The book is a different technology now than reading online. But the thing that I want to say is that if you're feeling like, man, I can't get through this, I'm on my tablet, it's not just you. It is the reality is that our brains are really changing in terms of, this as stimuli. How we behave with this is completely different. And I'm going to move on, but for everything I'm saying, I really want to build like even more of an argument. And that's why I'm trying to put these data points here, but there's so much to say. We also, mountain argument, mountain it. We also are coming to a fear of information or infophobia, information aversion, because we have an information glut. And I'm gonna move on from here, but there is a lot. I was trying to look up the word, like what kind of phobia is it? It's infophobia, so it wasn't deep. But the reality is that we are starting, because we are so fearful of the information glut, of being left behind, of feeling like we can't absorb it, and we're having some issues with literacy, is that we're turning to more and more familiar channels. We're turning to channels that might not be expert, but at least we kind of know them. So we are in spaces where we are trying to do what Socrates said, to live and examine life. But we are also finding that our reliance on the internet is also causing a form of alienation. And I want to say that this slide is really apropos of, it's kind of like out of sync with what I'm trying to say, but I couldn't find a place to put this, that digital devices, intermediation, social media is also making us feel more disconnected and ultimately more lonely. Does anyone understand that? Because I was like struggling, you know, when you put, what's the order? But I felt like I needed to say it. I didn't know where to say it. I have something else to say. I'm gonna line this up a little bit more, but I felt like I needed to say it. This is not the right place, but just forgive me. But I have to say this is because we're waking up in the morning and we're going to sleep at night, and I'm going to get to machine learning, but with this super curated information that if you're depressed will only make you more depressed. If you like pink jeans, will only show you pink jeans. If you're a runner, will make you feel like everybody's a runner and you're the slowest one. If you, you see what I'm trying to go with this? It doesn't fit here, but I wanted to share it. Being on social media for 2 hours or more is likely to make you feel 2 times more socially isolated. And there's so much data. The data here is just mounting. But let me move on. So I wanted to kind of say, we kind of know this already, but I wanted to share that even though we know that digital media is making us easier to manipulate, we still rely on it because we have FOMO, fear of missing out. And we're wired to have fear of missing, no matter how it makes us feel. We have this fear of missing out. If I miss the information, if somebody comes and tells you a world event and you didn't get it before them, where have I been? It just happened. You found out 3 minutes later than your friend. Where have I been? And here's something I thought when it comes to Australia. You see how you and the US, you're right up there in Italy. There's this understanding that social media is creating some chinks in the armor when it comes to civility and being able to get along. To see things in a way where we can reason together. And despite people's understanding, I think this innate and growing understanding that there's something that's problematic, that maybe we should talk out, maybe we should be less reliant, we still are. So we're not naive, is what these slides are trying to say. So, in many ways, our desire to not miss out, our nervousness about being overrun and controlled by information, our worry about information or being averse to information that might make us feel or a particular way or have to think more deeply than we're ready to, is really pushing us back to oracy. And I could say a lot more about that, and I hope you read these data points, but one of the things that we are seeing is that even when it comes to online behavior, we are moving away from text-based information, even when it's online. We are no longer thinking as much about, let me read what my friend is saying. We would rather watch them do it or hear them talk about it. So it's the real. it's the audio visual, it's information that might not be even verified that we are really glomming onto. And there's more to say about that. We are looking for information that is from people who are like us, rather than people who are experts. Oracy isn't bad. I mean, you know, a lot of our literacy is tied up in oracy. Even the rise of things like Harry Potter, the reason why Harry Potter became a runaway sensation, translated in so many languages, is that it was the one book that began to be read aloud again in schools, by families. And that is one of our primary forms of literacy. And I always say to people, read to those you love. Because for some people, that might be their only way to really engage deeply with ideas or literacy, regardless of their literacy level. What else should I say here? Yeah, I've talked about most things here. There's also an indication, as I said before, that adult literacy could be declining. And there was an article recently warning about adult literacy. It focused a lot, it talked generally about Australia, but it focused a lot on Tasmania. But again, one of the things that I've been really watching for is I've been watching for the impact of literacy on young people, and also the impact of low levels of literacy on economic access and mobility. And there's a lot of data in terms of what's happening in Australia. Here is data that is talking specifically about literacy levels in Australia. And as you can see, this is very recent data here. This is coming from this year, talking specifically about the kinds of low-level literacy that is, that is being experienced here in Australia and also in the U.S. So in the U.S., we have some of the highest levels of low literacy in some of the most expensive states to live in. We also have high levels of adult whites who are, have low literacy in the United States. Even though we have the most immigrants in the United States compared to any other country, we see that it is a lot of native-born, and when I say native, it's different from the experience here, but people who can trace, everybody in the U.S. Except indigenous people are coming there, but people who would consider themselves to be like 4 or 5 generations in the U.S. also have very low literacy. And I just wanted to show it by states, because if some of you have been in the States, you can probably sort of see this. You probably have had this particular type of experience. The other thing is that it leads to the high level of incarceration. The fact that in certain states and cities, like the one I live in Chicago, 2 out of 5 adults have low literacy also is connected to why we have such high levels of incarceration. And you know that, or should, that the U.S. has the highest level of incarceration runaway compared to any other country, industrialized country. We're also seeing, with human literacy on the decline, we are seeing the rise in machine learning. And I just wanted to sort of talk about the ways that machine learning really happen when it comes to a marketing environment. And this is from Sales Manager. So it's smart segmentation, being able to kind of separate this out. All of this is psychographic, sentiment analysis, natural language processing, product recommendations. So the fact that you are always being shown running shoes, that type of curation, you are helping, but you are seeing specific types of running shoes. When I first came to Chicago, I bought a little condo on the north side, and then I moved to New York, and when I came back, I bought a place with a friend and on the south side, and I kept the other place and rented it out because people were living there. I didn't want to displace them. Completely different. I'm a completely different person with completely different wants and needs depending on where I am. when they connect to me on the north side, I actually care about my health and can have better car insurance. When I'm on the south side, and there's a lot of functions, as you know, that we use when we talk about machine learning. But one of the things that I want to say is that because if this thing is always on, it's listening to us, we're helping to curate it. We have moved from the era of the smartphone, and I love what is said here. We have moved from the era of the smartphone. We have moved into this notion of going from smart to intelligent, and we are the ones that are helping make that happen, even though in some cases it's to our detriment. Machine learning is allowing us to accelerate, in some cases, the completion of simple but routine tasks, but and connect more seamlessly with goods and services. But machine learning also gives way to bad data, to bias, to redlining, to predatory uses. And so it doesn't just rely on who you are, but where you are and how you are. So I want to move to this piece here about machine learning in particular, is looking at the low information voter, because we are caught, in an election cycle right now. And all my worst fears are rising because of what's happening in the United States. But this was an article that just came out in the New Yorker. If you haven't read this article, I really want you to. When it comes to thinking about low information voter, this is in the context of the US. And, I was in London for a long time. I was in the UK for most of the beginning part of the year, and I'll share some of that data. But there's evidence that contemporary politics is relying heavily on declines in basically human literacy and on the rise in machine learning. And we're going to talk about that here. The low information voter. This is the most important. This is the voter that decides most elections today. So I just wanted to show you something really quickly. Are you still with me? Because I'm jamming, I'm up here, I got you, it's like hostage. I'm talking about the things I care about. And I see some of you, you're in it. I just want to make sure I don't lose you because I'm here for you. I really, want to make sure that this is useful to you. But let's see what I said really quickly. What I've talked about before we get to basically how it's showing up, besides COVID and mismedication or dispensing information, having all this information and not being able to use it, the way it's showing up in terms of censorship or basically information aversion, is that it's really showing up in our electoral politics. And so I have this comparison. So, Tony and I were talking about this, people, I remember the day before the election, November 3rd, 2016, and I'm in a meeting of all these EDs. We've had this our annual come together and commiserate meeting. And at the end, people were like, well, let's go around in a circle and everybody check out. And people were like, oh, I'm just so excited. We're gonna have our first, female president. Everybody's going there, Hillary Clinton. They come to me and are like, well, Tracie, check out. I said, yeah, I wish I was as optimistic as you are, because I think Trump's going to win it. And I said, no, I think he's going to win it. I said, because I'm not thinking about how I feel. I'm reading the tea leaves here. So I want you to look at who Trump's base was. And I want you to specifically look at education levels. You can look at age, you can look at racial demographics and all this, but I really want you to focus on education levels. Now I want you to look over here, and I want you to look at who voted for Brexit. Which, everybody in whether they're conservative, whatever, when I was in London, everybody's apologizing still for Brexit. Well, we know now there's been a whole referendum, whole change. But I want you to see who the voting base was when you look at education levels. And when you look at somewhat immigrants, you kind of also have to understand that this was built on xenophobia and recruited people who were immigrants to also be xenophobic against newcomer immigrants. But I want you to focus on, do you see some symmetry? the low information voter. So here are some things that I wanted you to pay attention to. First of all, Biden was out of touch because Biden's base was an educated base, an older educated base. Secondly, I want you to look at this quote. There is now so much bad information, this is from low information voting, floating around that thoughtful people, skeptical of the mainstream news, can do their own research and reach their own conclusions where? Low information voters are more likely to embrace stereotypes of other groups and less likely to fact check disinformation and the low information voter. Voting and the literacy tax, side-by-side comparisons of the US and the UK. To be literate is a tax. To have very limited literacy is a tax. In both cases, and what we could see here is that in many cases, literacy is also, or the lack of literacy is what's deciding. So low information, people who don't have access to information or don't seek access for information or are really tribal about information, and then people who have the inability to access high quality information. It's also giving way to censorship, state-sponsored censorship, which is very different. And I've just been in a lot of places across the world over the last year, sabbatical, just checking this out. Just looking at just the tide of literacy, of censorship, just unabated, whether it's in the US or Canada, here in Australia, Poland. So as I get ready to conclude, I wanted to make sure that I covered all my bases for this talk. So I said, let me go to ChatGPT. And let me ask, what do Australian people need to know about this issue of AI and human literacy? And here's the conclusion. There's your, what's the pros, what's the cons? Overall, Australians should stay informed about the developments in AI literacy, embrace the opportunities it offers for improving literacy skills, while also being mindful of the potential challenges and risks associated with its use. So as I close, I just want to share ways to increase our own human literacy. And if I was on a soapbox, the one thing that I would say is that we absolutely have to make sure, if you have young people in your life, if you don't listen to me, listen to the Journal of American Medical Association and just article after article after article. If a child is not yet fully literate, and certainly before 6, limit their screen time. And I certainly wouldn't, and you have a lot of young people between the ages of 6 and 10, and even younger who have cell phones, because I looked at that data and I didn't want you to get mad at me, so I didn't put it up here. But far too many. I mean, what we know is that giving a child, you know, and you see the babies in the prams and strollers, they just have the cell phone and they're like, they can barely hold on to it. They're not even 1 or 2 years old. Severe cognitive delays. That ability to access, interpret, and apply, completely thrown out of the window. So if I had to leave right now, I have come here to say, delay screen time. Please, please, for the sake of your child as a reader, article after article. The second thing is part of the first thing is model reading. Long form, put your phone down. I was in the library in Norway, in Oslo, Dikeman Library, and the first thing you do when they come in there is give you a little pouch and put your cell phone in. Give yourself cell phone times when you're not on your cell phone. Absolutely. Dinner time, no. That is your time for human interaction. It's actual time for learning about your human literacy with the people that it might count most. So I would say this, please limit screen time for your child and limit screen time for yourself. Have at least, do you know that when you are active with your cell phone over, I think there's like some of the studies I've seen that over less than 2 hours, people check their cell phone 150 times or more. You cannot think with your cell phone. So that's one thing. I'm sorry if I make you mad, but I just wanted to, because it's so much data. We're talking about human literacy. Okay, number 2, get out. Read and attend lectures like this. Because it exposes you to ideas. You can't just get up in the middle if I say something you don't like. I mean, you could do it, but you know what I mean? But go out. And if it's something that you don't like, work it out in your mind and give yourself some, what else, what's missing? What would you add? What would you change? Go out in person. We are ordering food in. We don't go out. This is a problem. It's a problem in our human literacy. We're siloing. Not only are we becoming lonelier, but it's really bad for our civic fluency, our ability to learn how to be with others and to truly be in the know. So the last one is practice information access rigor. Don't spread disinformation. Don't click something that you haven't checked. Don't share something that you yourself haven't done the work on. Read long form. Push yourself to read long. If you can make it past, just like you would if you were working out, you're trying to hold a plank or something, I need to do some of that. But what I'm trying to say here is practice reading longer than 5 minutes. Like if your mind, it's like meditation, they're like, come back. You say, come back, because it's going to help us cognitively in terms of our long-term cognitive health, but it's also going to make us better thinkers, more rigorous thinkers. It's going to give us a discipline to later on, especially in terms of crisis or crisis informatics, to be able to know how to dig deep and get the information we need that could change our lives. And make sure that it's fact-based. So lastly, you got to keep the wheel turning. Keep the wheel turning. Don't just consume data. Do the extra work of converting it to information. And once you do that, do the extra work of converting it to knowledge. And I would add, do the extra work of converting knowledge to action. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.